The wind was screaming through the empty plains that morning, carrying dust, silence, and something far heavier, regret. No one wanted to go near the old stable anymore. Locals said it was cursed. They said the horse inside had died long ago, not in body, but in spirit. And when a horse loses its spirit, people stop calling it a living thing. But on that morning, something moved behind the broken wooden doors. A shadow. A breath. A sound that didn't belong to death. It belonged to something waiting. And far away, in a courthouse that would soon become the center of an impossible truth, a man stood staring at a file no one dared to open for years. The file was labeled. Case, Black Thunder, Status, Deceased. But the man reading it knew that wasn't the truth. His name was Daniel Mercer, a former livestock investigator who had once believed every case had a clean ending. Until life proved him wrong again and again. Now, he had been called back, not because he wanted to return, but because something impossible had happened. A witness had come forward claiming, "The horse is alive, and he remembers everything." At first, Daniel laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it hurt less than believing it. Black Thunder had been declared dead 5 years ago after a violent storm destroyed a ranch near the valley edge. No body was ever recovered. Only fragments of broken fence, hoofprints leading into the river, and silence. But silence was never proof of death. It was just absence. And absence can lie. Back at the abandoned ranch, a woman stood quietly at the edge of the broken fence line. Her name was Elena Marrow. She hadn't spoken much since the incident. People in town whispered about her, said she lost everything that night. Her land. Her family's reputation. And most of all, the horse she raised from a foal. Black Thunder wasn't just an animal to her. He was her promise to her late father. A promise that she would protect what was wild, not break it. But promises don't always survive reality. The storm had come like a punishment from the sky. Lightning tore through the valley. Rivers swallowed the ground. And in the chaos, the horse vanished. Or so everyone believed. Except Elena. Because she remembered something no report ever included. The look in his eyes before he ran into the storm. Not fear. Not panic. Recognition. As if he was being called. And now, years later, strange things were happening again. Fences were broken, but not by animals. Hoofprints were appearing near the riverbank. Fresh ones. Elena had followed them twice already. Twice she had stopped before crossing the old bridge. Twice she had turned back shaking, telling herself it was impossible. But the third time, she didn't turn back. Because this time, she heard it. A low, deep sound echoing through the valley. Not a neigh. Not a cry. A memory. And memory has a way of pulling people into places they promised themselves they would never return to. Meanwhile, in the courthouse, Daniel Mercer shut the file and exhaled slowly. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. But even as he said it, his instincts told him something different. He had seen enough fraud cases, enough mistaken identity claims, enough desperate people trying to rewrite reality. But this was different. Because no one benefits from claiming a dead horse is alive. Unless it's true. And truth always leaves evidence. That afternoon, Daniel drove out to the valley. The roads were narrower than he remembered. The landscape felt unchanged, but heavier, as if the land itself remembered what happened. When he arrived at the ranch, Elena was already waiting. She didn't smile. She didn't greet him. She simply said, "You don't believe me." It wasn't a question. Daniel stepped out of his car slowly. "I believe in facts," he replied. "And right now, there are none." Elena looked toward the broken hills. "Then you should see it for yourself." They walked in silence. Every step deeper into the valley felt like crossing into something unfinished. Elena finally spoke again, her voice quieter now. "He didn't die that night." Daniel frowned. The river was violent. No animal could survive that flood. Elena stopped walking. "He didn't try to survive," she said. That sentence made Daniel pause. "What do you mean?" Elena turned to him, her eyes heavy with something between grief and certainty. "He ran into it like he was going somewhere he already knew." The wind shifted again. And for a split second, Daniel heard it too. A distant sound. Hooves. But when he turned, there was nothing. Only dust. Only silence. Only the feeling that something was watching from just beyond sight. And far deeper in the valley, behind collapsed stone and forgotten fences, something massive moved once more. Not running. Not hiding. But waiting. Because Black Thunder was no longer just a lost horse. He was becoming a question no court would be ready to answer. And questions like that never stay buried for long. The valley looked different once you stopped trusting it. Daniel Mercer noticed that first. It wasn't that anything had changed physically. The same broken fences, the same dried river veins cutting through the land, the same skeletal trees leaning like tired witnesses. But something in it felt awake. Like the place wasn't empty anymore. Like it was waiting for someone to admit the truth. Elena walked ahead without speaking, her boots pressing into the cracked earth with familiar certainty. She didn't look back, not even once. That alone unsettled Daniel more than anything else. People who are lying, they check for reactions. People who are certain, don't. Where exactly did you see it? Daniel finally asked. Elena stopped near the edge of a slope that dropped toward the riverbed. Here, she said. Just one word. But it carried weight. She knelt slowly and brushed away dust from the ground. Daniel stepped closer, crouching beside her. At first, he saw nothing. Then he saw it. Hoof prints. Clear. Fresh. Deep enough to suggest size, power, weight. But that wasn't what made his breath tighten. It was the pattern. Not random. Not panicked. Controlled. Impossible, he whispered before he could stop himself. Elena didn't react. Instead, she pointed slightly to the left. Follow them. The prints led downward toward the river. Daniel hesitated. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was a waste of time. Animals don't vanish for years and then return leaving perfect evidence trails like a storybook. And yet, he followed. The air grew colder near the water. The sound of the valley shifted. Wind became louder here, as if the land was funneling sound toward a single point. Elena stopped near a bend in the river where rocks formed a natural barrier. This is where it happened, she said softly. Daniel looked at her. The storm. She nodded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And then Daniel saw it. Scratches on the rock face. Deep ones. Too deep for normal impact. As if something massive had been dragged, or had fought against being taken. Did you report this? He asked. Elena gave a faint, almost bitter smile. I reported everything. No one listened. That sentence lingered longer than it should have. Because Daniel knew exactly how that felt. He had seen cases buried because they were inconvenient. Files marked closed not because they were solved, but because people stopped asking. But a dead horse turning up alive wasn't just inconvenient. It was impossible. Unless the truth had been ignored for years. A sudden gust of wind swept through the canyon, and Daniel instinctively turned his head. That's when he heard it again. Hooves. Closer this time. He spun around fully. Nothing. Elena didn't look surprised. You hear him too now, she said quietly. Daniel frowned. I hear wind. No, she replied. That's not wind. And then she did something unexpected. She called out. Not loudly. Not desperately. But like someone speaking to a memory they weren't sure still existed. Thunder. The valley answered with silence. For a moment, Daniel almost felt relief. Maybe this really was grief turning into hallucination. Maybe Elena had spent too many years alone with loss. But then, the ground shifted. Not visibly, but subtly. Like something heavy had stepped somewhere just beyond sight. Daniel's instincts snapped into alert. What was that? He asked sharply. Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow breath. He remembers me, she said. And that was when Daniel realized something important. This wasn't about whether the horse was alive or dead. It was about whether the past was finished. And something about this valley suggested it wasn't. A sound echoed again, this time unmistakable. A hoof striking stone. Daniel moved forward instinctively, but Elena grabbed his arm. "Don't chase him," she warned. "Why?" Daniel asked. "Because he doesn't run from danger," she said quietly. "He runs from judgment." That line didn't make sense at first, but it settled into Daniel's mind like a weight. Elena released his arm and stepped forward alone, slowly descending toward the river rocks. "Thunder," she called again. This time, her voice cracked slightly. Not fear. Not doubt. Something worse. Hope. And hope, Daniel realized, was the most dangerous thing in this valley. Because hope makes people see what they want to see. A shape appeared. Just for a second. Between the rocks. Massive. Dark. Breathing. Daniel froze. It wasn't a hallucination. It had mass. It had presence. It was real. Then it vanished again, melting into shadow as if the valley itself swallowed it. Elena didn't chase it this time. She just closed her eyes. "I told you," she whispered. "He didn't die." Daniel's voice was quieter now. "Then where has he been for 5 years?" Elena opened her eyes slowly. "That's what you're here to find out." The wind picked up again, harder now, almost urgent. And somewhere deeper in the canyon, something moved again. Not fleeing. Not hiding. But circling. Watching. Waiting for the moment it would no longer need to stay hidden. Because Black Thunder wasn't just returning. He was choosing when to be seen. And that meant whatever had happened 5 years ago was not over. Not even close. Daniel Mercer didn't sleep that night. Not because he couldn't, but because every time he closed his eyes, he heard it again. Hooves. Not random. Not imagined. Precise. Like something circling just beyond the edge of understanding, refusing to fully reveal itself. And worse than the sound, was the certainty growing inside him that Elena Marrow wasn't lying. Morning came cold and grey, as if the valley itself had decided not to fully wake up. Daniel met Elena outside the old ranch house. She was already standing there, as if she hadn't moved all night. "You followed him again?" he asked. Elena nodded once. "Did you see him?" Daniel pressed. A pause. Then, "Not fully." That answer should have frustrated him. Instead, it tightened something in his chest. Because not fully meant she was seeing something partial, something incomplete. And incomplete truths are always the most dangerous kind. They walked deeper into the valley again, this time toward an abandoned ridge that overlooked the river basin. Elena led him without hesitation. "You know this place too well," Daniel said after a while. "I was raised here," she replied. So was he. Daniel glanced at her. Black Thunder. Elena stopped walking for a moment. "Yes," she said quietly. "But he wasn't always called that." That made Daniel pause. What was his name before? Elena looked out toward the horizon, where the land blurred into heat and memory. "He didn't have one," she said. "Not until he chose to stay." That sentence didn't make sense in a normal context. But nothing about this case was normal anymore. They reached the ridge, and from there, the valley opened wide below them. Elena pointed down. "Watch." Daniel narrowed his eyes. At first, he saw nothing. Then, movement. Far below, near the broken riverbed, something emerged from the tree line. Large. Slow. Controlled. A horse. Daniel instinctively reached for confirmation, but his breath caught before he could speak. Because this wasn't just any horse. It moved like something that had survived something that should have ended it. Muscles tense, body scarred, posture alert, not wild in the sense of fear, but wild in the sense of memory. Elena's voice came softly beside him. "That's him." Daniel stared. Even from this distance, the animal carried an overwhelming presence. Not aggression. Not panic. Recognition. Like it knew the land was watching it too. The horse stopped near the riverbed. Then turned its head upward. Directly toward them. Daniel felt it instantly, a strange pressure in his chest. Like being seen. Not by an animal. But by something that understood more than it should. Elena whispered, "He knows we're here." Daniel didn't move. Neither did the horse. For a long moment, the valley held them all in silence, human, memory, and something in between. Then the horse did something unexpected. It stepped forward. One step. Then another. Not running. Not escaping. Approaching. Daniel's rational mind fought to reassert control. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "An animal doesn't survive a flood, disappear for 5 years, and return like nothing happened." Elena finished softly. Daniel looked at her sharply. "That's not what I meant." But Elena wasn't listening anymore. Her focus was completely on the horse. And then she did something Daniel didn't expect. She spoke its name again. Thunder. This time, her voice wasn't calling. It was asking. The horse stopped. Completely. Its ears shifted. Its body tensed, but not in fear. In recognition. Daniel felt it then. The shift. Something invisible but undeniable. Like the moment before a storm breaks. The horse took another step. Then another. And suddenly, it reared slightly. Not aggressively, but as if reacting to something unseen behind them. Daniel spun around instantly. Nothing. Just wind. Just rocks. Just silence. But the horse didn't relax. Instead, it focused on Daniel. And for the first time, Daniel felt something deeply unsettling. It wasn't looking at him as a stranger. It was assessing him. As if remembering. Elena stepped forward slightly. "Daniel, don't move." "Why?" he asked. Her voice dropped. "Because he doesn't trust men anymore." That line hit harder than expected. Daniel slowly lowered his posture, trying to appear non-threatening. The horse watched him carefully. Then something changed. Its stance softened slightly. Not trust, but hesitation. Like it was remembering a different version of humans. Elena took a slow step forward. And then, it happened. The horse moved toward her. Not cautiously. Not uncertainly. But deliberately. Elena exhaled sharply, almost like she had been holding her breath for years. "Thunder," she whispered again. The horse stopped just a few feet away. Close enough now that Daniel could see scars along its neck and shoulder. Old injuries. Deep ones. Not from nature. From impact. From force. From something that should have killed it. Elena reached out slowly. Her hand trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. The horse didn't pull away. It allowed her touch. And in that moment, something broke inside the silence of the valley. Because this wasn't just reunion. This was recognition after survival. Daniel watched. Frozen. And then he noticed something else. Carved into the ground behind the horse's hooves were markings. Not natural. Not random. Intentional. Symbols scratched into dirt and stone like repeated paths. He stepped closer. Elena noticed his movement. "What is it?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Because his mind was already forming a conclusion he didn't want to believe. "These aren't escape patterns," he said slowly. Elena frowned. "Then what are they?" Daniel swallowed. "They're return paths." A silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. And then Daniel said the part that made everything worse. "He didn't get lost in the storm, Elena." A pause. "He was taken." The wind stopped. Even the horse shifted slightly at those words. Because somewhere in the valley, something else knew Daniel was getting closer to the truth. And it didn't want him to continue. The moment Daniel said he was taken, the valley changed. Not visibly. Not in a way most people would notice. But in the way silence suddenly feels heavier, like it's listening back. Elena stepped away from the horse slowly, her hand still trembling in the air where its warmth had just been. "What are you saying?" she asked, though her voice already knew the answer might destroy her. Daniel didn't look away from the markings in the dirt. "These paths, they don't look random. They look controlled. Repeated. Like something was forcing movement patterns over time." Elena shook her head. "That's impossible. Who would take a horse into the middle of a flood zone?" Daniel finally met her eyes. Someone who didn't want him found. A long silence followed. Even Black Thunder, standing only a few feet away now, seemed stiller, as if the word taken carried a meaning he recognized too deeply. Elena whispered, "He survived 5 years alone." Daniel stepped closer to the markings again. "No," he said quietly. "He survived something for 5 years." The wind picked up again, sharper now, cutting through the ridge like a warning. And then Daniel noticed something else. A second layer beneath the hoof patterns. Scrapes. Dragged lines. Not from running. From restraint. His stomach tightened. "These aren't survival tracks," he said more firmly now. "They're movement constraints." Like he was being guided, or controlled. Elena's face went pale. "You're saying someone kept him, like property?" Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the word felt too simple for what he was seeing. But before he could respond, Black Thunder suddenly turned his head toward the far end of the valley. His entire body stiffened. Every muscle tightened like a pulled wire. Elena noticed instantly. "What is it?" Daniel followed the horse's gaze. Nothing. At first. Just the same ridges. Same broken horizon. But then, a distant sound. Not hooves this time. Wheels. Faint. Mechanical. Out of place in the natural silence of the valley. Daniel's instincts snapped into focus. "We're not alone." Elena turned sharply. "No one comes here anymore." "Someone does," Daniel said. And Black Thunder confirmed it. The horse took a step backward. Not in fear. In recognition of danger. Elena's voice dropped. "He knows that sound." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So do I." A shape appeared far down the ridge road. A vehicle. Old. Dust-covered. But moving deliberately. Elena took a step forward instinctively. "No," she whispered. "That can't be here." Daniel grabbed her arm gently. "Don't move." The vehicle stopped at the base of the ridge. And for a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. A man stepped out. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the posture. Confident. Unhurried. Familiar with the terrain. Elena's breath caught. "I know him," she said. Daniel looked at her sharply. "Who is he?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Ranch security. From years ago, before the storm." Daniel's mind raced. Then he would have been here when the incident happened. Elena nodded slowly. "Yes." And that was when everything began to align in Daniel's head in a way that made his stomach turn. Because storms don't erase evidence. People do. The man below looked up toward the ridge. And for a split second, Daniel felt it. Recognition. Not from him. From the horse. Black Thunder stepped forward suddenly. One step. Then another. Elena moved toward him instinctively. "Thunder, no." But the horse didn't stop. It was no longer reacting like an animal seeing a stranger. It was reacting like a witness seeing someone from the past. Daniel whispered, "He knows him." Elena froze. "Knows him how?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Because the realization forming in his mind was too heavy to speak too quickly. Instead, he said, "This wasn't a rescue gone wrong." A pause. This was a removal. The man below raised a hand. Not a wave. A signal. And suddenly, Daniel saw movement in the distance behind him. More vehicles. Hidden until now. Elena stepped back in shock. That's not possible." Daniel's voice dropped. "It is when someone doesn't want something found." Black Thunder suddenly stomped the ground. Hard. Once. The sound echoed through the ridge like a warning bell. And then, something even more chilling happened. The horse turned its head toward Elena. Not toward the man. Not toward the vehicles. Toward her. And Daniel saw it instantly. The conflict. Memory pulling in two directions. Trust versus trauma. Past versus survival. Elena whispered, "He remembers." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." Then he added, softer, "And he remembers everything." Below, the man stepped closer to the base of the ridge. and shouted something Daniel couldn't fully hear. But the horse reacted instantly. Black Thunder stepped between Elena and the ridge. Protective. Not fleeing. Guarding. Elena's eyes widened. His protecting me. Daniel exhaled slowly. Yes, he said. But not just you. A pause. His protecting the truth. The wind surged again. And for the first time, Daniel understood the full weight of what was happening. This wasn't just about a missing horse. It was about what that horse had witnessed. And what someone had tried very hard to erase. Black Thunder let out a low, deep sound. Not a neigh. Not a call. A warning. And far below, the man stopped moving. Because he understood it too. The past wasn't buried anymore. It was standing on the ridge. Breathing. Watching. And remembering. The valley didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a witness stand. And everyone, Daniel Mercer, Elena Marrow, and the man standing far below at the ridge, was suddenly part of something that had been waiting 5 years to speak. Black Thunder stood unmoving between Elena and the approaching vehicles. Not aggressive. Not panicked. Just certain. Like he had finally arrived at the moment he had been walking toward all along. Elena's voice barely rose above the wind. Why is he here, after all this time? Daniel's eyes stayed locked on the ridge. Because the truth doesn't stay buried, he said. It just waits for the right pressure. Below them, the man shouted again. This time clearer. Bring it back under control. Control. That word made something inside Daniel click into place. Elena stepped forward slightly, but Black Thunder immediately shifted, blocking her again. Not violently. Protectively. And that's when it hit her fully. He's not afraid of me, she whispered. He's afraid of what comes after me. Daniel nodded once. Or what happened because of you being here? Elena turned sharply. I didn't do anything. Daniel's voice stayed calm, but heavy. I know. A pause. But someone did. The wind surged again, stronger now, as if the valley itself was becoming impatient. And then Daniel made a decision. We're going to court, he said. Elena blinked. What? He turned toward her fully now. If that horse survived what we think he survived, then this isn't a field discovery anymore. It's evidence. Elena looked down at Black Thunder. And he'll come. Daniel looked at the horse. I think he already has. The courthouse. 2 days later. The building was never meant for something like this. Courtrooms are designed for arguments. Not miracles. Not horses that should have been dead. But that morning, every seat was full. Reporters. Officials. Witnesses. And at the center of it all stood Daniel Mercer holding a sealed file that had been reopened after years of silence. Across from him, the same man from the valley stood with a lawyer at his side. And behind them, Elena Marrow. Quiet. Unsteady. But no longer alone. The judge adjusted his glasses. This court has reconvened to examine the status of Black Thunder, previously declared deceased. A murmur moved through the room. Daniel stepped forward. Your Honor, he said, that declaration was based on incomplete evidence. The opposing lawyer scoffed. A horse doesn't just vanish for 5 years and reappear in court. Daniel didn't flinch. No, he said. It doesn't. He turned slightly toward the doors at the back of the courtroom. And yet, here we are. The doors creaked open. Silence fell instantly. Because standing there was Black Thunder. Alive. Scarred. Real. Not a memory. Not a rumor. A presence so heavy it changed the air in the room. Gasps erupted instantly. Someone dropped a folder. A chair scraped back. The judge leaned forward sharply. What is this? Elena stepped forward slowly. That, she said, voice shaking but clear, is the horse you declared dead. Black Thunder took one step into the courtroom. Then another. And stopped. Right in the center. Like he had chosen this place. Daniel watched him carefully. This isn't just about survival, he said. It's about what he remembers. The opposing lawyer stood abruptly. This is absurd. You're bringing an animal into a legal proceeding. Black Thunder suddenly lifted his head. The sound he made was low, deep, controlled. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. And the man from the valley, who had followed them into court, went pale. Because the horse was looking directly at him. Elena noticed instantly. He knows you, she whispered. The man's voice cracked slightly. That horse was lost in the storm. Daniel stepped forward. No, he said firmly. He was removed before the storm finished its job. A stunned silence followed. The judge raised a hand. Explain. Daniel opened the file. And for the first time, the truth that had been buried under years of silence began to surface. Black Thunder wasn't killed, he said. He was captured after the flood. Moved through restricted routes. Contained and hidden. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Elena's eyes widened slightly as the realization settled deeper. Daniel continued. And the reason he was declared dead is because someone needed him gone from the record. The man from the valley shifted uncomfortably. Black Thunder took one slow step forward. Then another. Stopping directly in front of him. The courtroom held its breath. Because in that moment, something impossible happened. The horse lowered its head slightly. Not in submission. But in memory. And the man whispered, almost involuntarily. You're supposed to be dead. Silence shattered. Daniel's voice cut through it immediately. Your Honor, the witness is not a myth. He is proof. And what he remembers may be the only living record of what really happened that night. Elena stepped forward too now. Her voice steadying for the first time. He didn't die in that storm, she said. He survived what came after it. Black Thunder turned his head slightly toward her. And for the first time in years, he stood still without fear. The judge exhaled slowly. This court recognizes the need for full investigation. But Daniel wasn't finished. There's more, he said quietly. A pause. Because this horse didn't just survive. He looked at Black Thunder. He came back for a reason. And then, in the quietest moment of all, Black Thunder turned. Not toward the judge. Not toward the man. But toward Elena. And stepped forward until he stood beside her. As if finally confirming what the entire valley had been trying to say for years. He was never just lost. He was waiting. Waiting for the truth to be heard. And now, it finally had.